Sometimes, the things that disturb us the most are not loud, not violent, not obvious, but quiet, persistent, and just slightly out of place, like a detail that refuses to disappear no matter how hard we try to explain it away. And in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen, that detail took the form of something so small, so simple, that at first no one thought it deserved attention. A little blue tent sitting in the backyard of a family home, occupied night after night by a 5-year-old boy who seemed perfectly content with a choice that no one else could understand. At the beginning, it looked almost harmless. Almost. The kind of thing people smile at when they notice it through a kitchen window, a child playing at adventure, pretending the backyard is a forest, the tent a campsite, and the night something exciting rather than something cold and uncertain. Jane Parker had been the first to notice him, standing by her sink as she dried dishes, watching young Cody carefully drag a blanket across the grass, arranging it with a kind of focus that felt almost too serious for a game. She had smiled at first, the way adults do when they see something innocent, something that reminds them of how simple childhood can be. "He's camping," her husband David had said when she mentioned it later that evening, his tone relaxed, dismissive in the way that turns unusual things into ordinary ones. And for a while, that explanation worked. One night became two became three. And nothing seemed wrong, but then the pattern didn't stop. A week passed, then another, and then another, and Cody was still there, sleeping outside, every night. At first, the neighborhood treated it like a curiosity, something worth a passing glance during morning walks or quiet comments exchanged between neighbors who had nothing else to talk about. But as the days stretched into weeks, the feeling began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, from amusement into something else, something heavier that no one wanted to name out loud. Because children do strange things. But not like this, not for this long. Jane felt it before she admitted it to herself. That quiet discomfort that appears when something doesn't fit into any explanation you trust, the way her eyes would drift toward the backyard without meaning to, the way her chest would tighten slightly each time she saw the small shape of the tent sitting alone in the dim light, untouched, unquestioned, as if it had become part of the landscape rather than something that should have raised concern. It wasn't just that Cody was outside, it was that no one seemed to be stopping him. His parents were rarely visible. The house itself felt quiet in a way that didn't match the presence of a child. And each evening, as the air grew colder and the sky darkened, no voice called him in, no light flickered on in the yard, no movement suggested that anyone was watching over him the way they should have been. That silence began to feel wrong, and once that thought took hold, it didn't let go. By the time the 7th week began, the entire neighborhood had noticed, even if no one had acted on it yet. Dog walkers slowed as they passed the yard, glancing twice at the tent as if expecting it to disappear if they looked long enough. Joggers whispered to each other in the early morning when they saw Cody stepping out of the tent in wrinkled pajamas, stretching as if nothing about his routine was unusual. Conversations began quietly, behind doors, in kitchens, on sidewalks, always starting the same way. "Have you seen that boy?" At first, the theories were harmless. He liked camping. He was pretending. His parents were just relaxed. But slowly, the tone changed, because people do not ignore discomfort forever. And when they can't explain something, they begin to imagine reasons for it. Some wondered if there had been an argument in the house. Others thought maybe the boy was afraid of something inside. A few, more quietly, began to ask darker questions they didn't want to say out loud. Jane heard all of it, and she hated it. But she couldn't stop thinking the same things, because every time she looked at that tent, she didn't just see a child playing. She saw a child choosing not to go inside. And that choice didn't make sense. Finally, one morning, after weeks of watching from a distance, Jane decided she could no longer stay behind the window, telling herself that concern was enough, that observation was enough, because it wasn't. She baked cookies. Not because it was necessary, but because it gave her a reason to approach without accusation, without fear, without turning concern into something confrontational. As she walked across the damp grass toward the tent, her heart beat faster than she expected, each step carrying a question she wasn't ready to ask out loud. And when she reached the small blue fabric structure, she paused for just a second before knocking lightly. The zipper moved, slowly, just enough for Cody's face to appear. His hair was messy, his cheeks warm, his expression bright in a way that almost erased everything Jane had been worrying about. "Hi, Mrs. Parker," he said. Jane smiled, offering the plate. "I brought you some cookies." His eyes lit up instantly. "Thank you." He reached out, taking them eagerly, but he didn't open the tent any further, didn't invite her to look inside, didn't move aside the way a child normally would when they want to share something they're proud of. Jane noticed that. Of course she did. She tried to keep her voice light. "You really like camping, huh?" "Yep." "Even every night?" "Yep." The answers were quick, too quick, and the smile that followed didn't invite more questions. It ended them. Before Jane could say anything else, he thanked her again and zipped the tent closed, leaving her standing there with more questions than before, staring at a small piece of fabric that now felt like a barrier rather than a shelter. When she returned home, David didn't need to ask. He saw it in her face. Something wasn't right, and for the first time, he believed her. That evening, they watched the yard in silence, not as neighbors anymore, but as people trying to understand something that refused to explain itself. And as the light faded and the temperature dropped, Cody moved calmly around the tent, organizing his space, settling in as if this had become his normal life. But what stayed with Jane wasn't what he did. It was how he did it, carefully, quietly, like someone who wasn't just playing, but protecting something. And that was the moment the curiosity turned into fear, because whatever was inside that tent, it wasn't just a game. That night, neither Jane nor David slept properly, not because anything had happened, but because nothing had changed. And that, somehow, felt worse, because when a problem reveals itself, even in the smallest way, it gives you something to respond to, something to act on. But when everything stays exactly the same, when a child continues sleeping outside as if it is the most normal thing in the world, the mind begins to fill the silence with possibilities that grow heavier with every hour. By morning, the decision had already been made, even if neither of them said it out loud at first, and when Jane finally did, her voice was quiet but firm, carrying something that David could not argue with anymore. "We can't just watch this," she said. He nodded slowly. Because now it wasn't curiosity, it was responsibility. That afternoon, David tried once more to speak with Cody, approaching the tent with a kind of calm, friendly tone that adults use when they don't want to scare a child, but still need answers, and at first, everything seemed normal. Cody greeted him politely, accepted the snacks David brought, smiled, nodded, answered questions in short, simple words that gave nothing away, and for a moment, it almost felt like the concern might dissolve again into something harmless, until David tried to go deeper. "Why do you sleep out here every night?" he asked gently. Cody's eyes shifted, not dramatically, just enough. His shoulders tightened slightly, his attention moved away, and within seconds, he changed the subject entirely, pointing towards something meaningless, talking about a squirrel, the sky, anything that would keep the conversation away from the one question that mattered. David saw it clearly now. This wasn't preference. This was avoidance. When he returned home, Jane didn't even need to ask. "He won't say," David told her. "Every time I get close, he shuts down." The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had felt before, because now the uncertainty had changed shape. It had become something real enough to act on, something they could no longer justify ignoring, no matter how uncomfortable the next step might be. They made the call. And the next day, when the police car pulled quietly into the street, everything shifted. The neighborhood, which had spent weeks whispering from a distance, suddenly became still, watching from behind curtains and windows, waiting for something to finally happen. And as the officer stepped out and approached the house, Jane felt a knot tighten in her chest, because part of her hoped she was wrong, hoped that all of this would turn out to be nothing more than a misunderstanding. But another part was already preparing for something worse. Sarah answered the door, her expression tense, guarded, as if she had been expecting this moment long before it arrived, and though Jane couldn't hear the words from across the street, she could see the conversation unfold in small movements, in the way Sarah's shoulders lifted, then dropped, in the way her eyes flicked briefly toward the backyard before returning to the officers. And then they walked toward the tent. Everything slowed. Jane's hand found David's arm without thinking, gripping it tightly as if grounding herself in something real, something steady, while the officers stopped a few feet away and called out gently, their voices calm, patient, careful not to frighten the small figure inside. The zipper moved. Cody appeared. And suddenly, the entire situation felt larger than anything they had imagined, because from a distance, the tent had been an object, a mystery, something separate from the child himself. But now, Seeing him standing there, small and uncertain, facing two uniformed strangers, it became something else entirely. He looked unsure, not scared, not upset, just unsure. The officers spoke softly, asking simple questions, giving him time to answer, and at first, Cody responded the same way he always had. Short answers, polite, careful, keeping everything on the surface, until something changed. Maybe it was their tone. Maybe it was the way they listened instead of pushing. Or maybe he was just tired of holding it in. Slowly, he stepped aside and invited them in. Jane felt her breath stop. Seconds passed. One officer remained outside. The other disappeared into the tent. And then he came back out, but his expression had changed completely. Not anger, not concern. Something else. Something softer. Something almost surprised. The truth spread quickly after that, not through whispers this time, but through something clearer, quieter, something that carried weight without needing exaggeration. Inside the tent, there was no secret, no danger, no hidden threat, just a small sleeping bag, a few toys, and beside them, a dog, Max, weak, sick, struggling. The reason everything had begun, the reason everything had continued. Because when Max had become too ill to stay inside the house, when the space had become difficult, when the situation had shifted in a way adults struggled to manage, Cody had made a decision in the only way a 5-year-old could. If his dog couldn't sleep inside, then neither would he. For 7 weeks, through cold nights and quiet mornings, through growing suspicion and unanswered questions, he had stayed there, not because he was afraid of something inside the house, but because he refused to let his best friend be alone outside. When the officer asked him why, Cody's answer was simple, honest, unfiltered. "He's my best friend," he said. "He needs me." And in that moment, everything the neighborhood had imagined collapsed into something far smaller and far more powerful. Because what they had seen as a mystery was nothing more than love. Pure, stubborn, uncomplicated. The kind of love that doesn't calculate comfort or consequences. The kind that doesn't question itself. The kind that simply stays, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how cold, no matter how long. The officers reassured him gently, spoke with his parents, arranged help for Max, and slowly, the tension that had hung over the street for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by something else entirely. Understanding, and something close to shame. Because from the outside, they had all been searching for something hidden, something dark, something complicated. And instead, they had found something simple, a child who understood loyalty better than any of them. And as the days passed, as the tent was eventually taken down, as Max received care and Cody returned to sleeping inside, the image that stayed with everyone was not the police car, not the rumors, not the fear. It was something quieter, a small boy in a tent, keeping watch. Because in the end, the mystery was never about what was wrong. It was about what was right, and how easily we forget to recognize it.